When my son was about 7 years old, I think, came home from school one day, and with him he had 3 letters that he'd written to people and organizations that he really liked. It was for an assignment that his teacher had given him. One of those letters just happened to be Save the Manatees. Now, I knew a little bit about the Manatees then, but not really much, so I did some research about Save the Manatees Club, and ever since then, I've been following them. In this episode, I had the privilege to have Pat Rose join me. He's the executive director for Save the Manatees Club. Now, he talks all about manatees and also about the support that Save the Manatees Club has been giving to these really cool, peaceful animals. Now, here's a couple things. Did you know that their closest land mammal, get this one, is the elephant? Yeah, the elephant. Also, did you know that Jimmy Buffett was instrumental and he helped them become the organization that they really are today? Did you catch the word instrumental? Anyways, in this episode, there's so many stories and so many facts that you're just going to be fascinated with. So join me to listen to one of the world's leading experts, Pat Rose, tell us all about their history, their stories, and how we can support these amazing creatures that I'm just really excited to bring you. It's a really, really cool episode. But lastly, I need to give a special thanks to my son, Tanner Kyle. Tanner, you're the one that taught me all about this organization. Save the Manatees Club. Remember that, everybody. And without you, Tanner, I wouldn't have got this episode out here. So again, thanks from all of us. We are supported by PrepVet, providing stem cell therapy for pets.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at prepvet.com. Save 10% with promo code Thefurrealpodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
For real, 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 for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange, losses and gains, from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Thefurrealpodcast. Today's one that's been meaning to happen to me, at least in my life, for about 25 years. I have a gentleman that's a renowned expert in aquatic biology. His name is the executive director of Save the Manatee Club, Pat Rose. Pat, thanks so much. We've had a few minutes to talk beforehand. I just can't wait to dig into this and get into manatees, your background and everything. And I really, really appreciate you joining the show.
Yeah, good morning. I'm glad to be here.
So let's start off with your background and we'll get into manatees because, you know, as I did my research when I was doing it, I realized I knew a little bit to be dangerous, but really not enough to really know anything. And what a really interesting, I guess I'm going to use the term creature, but these slow moving animals. So you're originally from Missouri, you studied school in Missouri, and then you end up going to Florida. And let's start there and get to where we are now.
Yeah, I actually was first exposed to manatees through Weekly Reader as a fourth grader.
Oh,
And so it's just kind of unique. And I've just loved water all my life, always getting in trouble for running off and fishing or swimming or playing, turning over rocks, looking at it. But I kept that fascination and studied aquatic biology. Actually tried to make it to Florida as an undergraduate, was given a scholarship, but couldn't afford to go because I'm 10th of 11 kids and we're kind of, grew up with, minimal amount of things available to us. But nevertheless, I persevered. I was given a grant to do my graduate research at the University of Missouri at Kansas City. And pretty much as soon as I finished that, I packed up everything that I had in a trailer, moved to Florida. But we had been there for, many different dive trips. I became a scuba diver and a skin diver in my teens. I became a scuba instructor, in fact, at 19 years old, and ultimately with the Professional Association of Dive Instructors and built underwater cameras and movie equipment and so forth. So I just really was all in on water, and seeing manatees for the first time actually in underwater. The first thing I saw was actually a scar, because where the water was kind of turbid, but that big, ugly scar on this wonderfully sensitive and really harmless animal. And it really did stick with me beyond all the sort of head knowledge that I had. So that was my really first introduction underwater, and I knew they were going to need an advocate, and I wanted to be that.
Well, what's interesting about Save the Manatee Club, one of the interesting things is, when I was doing my research on it, and I didn't realize, I knew that Jimmy Buffett was a big, water enthusiast and also supporting the environment, et cetera. He's the one that really got involved starting this, because what my favorite part of that story is that he had a concert, and the governor at the time, Bob Graham, and him had a conversation after a concert, which sounds such like a Jimmy Buffett story, and did that. But you've been there from the beginning, basically, right?
Yes, actually, the governor and Jimmy actually discussed forming the Save the Manatee Committee, and I had been working in manatee research and public awareness for several years at that point in time, actually with the Florida Audubon Society. So I was appointed as the first scientific advisor for Save the Manatee Committee. At that point, it was kind of a quasi-government and gubernatorially appointed group, and it also included uh, others like the Outboard Marine Corporation, in fact, and SeaWorld and the Fish and Wildlife. At the time, it's now called the Fish and Wildlife Commission, but at the time it was another wildlife agency, and so really that became the genesis of what later became the incorporated Save the Manatee Club.
Okay. So these guys talk, and you're already working with manatees, and then they start this organization. So what happens next? I mean, they call you up and say, we need you to be involved, because obviously you've been around as long as anybody since they've been doing it sounds like.
Right, and so we knew a lot had to be done. And so we were so grateful that that conversation came up and there was action going to be taken on behalf of the manatees. But it was kind of frustrating. And you have to also understand at that point in time, there were probably less than 1,000 manatees in Florida. They had been nearly extirpated because of hunting. Really, it wasn't the severe issues with boating and red tide and some of the harmful algal blooms that we face today that are impacting the larger environment. It really the low numbers of manatees were really a result of them being hunted and killed and eaten even for meat, and used their leather and that sort of thing. That had been reduced a lot within the United States and had been fully illegal for many, many years, but it had depleted the population so low that it was going to be a long, sort of arduous recovery.
Well, it's funny because when I was, doing whatever research I was doing, I didn't, one of the things I know that I think down in Amazon, they're smaller and they do some stuff down there, but I didn't realize they'd actually hunted these as well and eaten them for meat or whatever they were doing.
Yeah, that was the original problem. Like I said, though, it's really been pretty well controlled for quite a long time. And so but in West Africa, for example, it's still an issue. Haiti, there's in fact, many of the islands in the Caribbean, the manatees were actually extirpated completely. There are still a reasonably good population in Puerto Rico. They've been protected there as a territory of the United States. But you get to Dominican Republic, there's a little protections, but in Haiti, it's illegal, for example. But the people are in such poor
Right.
shape there in terms of their ability, just to all the turmoil, political, the gangs, and everything else that it's an area we work in a little bit, but it's very difficult. And most manatees there are still taken and would be killed if other actions aren't taken to save them literally.
A couple points on the Haiti thing. So for you guys that are listening, if you don't know, the island's split up in half. One is Haiti, the other side's Dominican Republic. And if you do the world Google thing, and you pull it out, you can actually see a line that delineates the two countries, because Haiti being so poor, they've taken out all the wood just to be able to burn in that. And it's bizarre. I mean, half the island's there and there. I've done some volunteer work, working with some people with children in Haiti. But the other thing about Haiti that I found interesting and read, and so it's folklore according to me, and you can attest whether you think it's true or not, Pat, is Columbus, when he was coming to discover America, saw three that he thought were mermaids, but would later determined to be manatees. What do you think?
There are certainly notations that they saw manatees in the West Indies area. I don't know that I can tell you exactly where that was, but it's in this region. And in fact, Columbus remarked that the mermaids were not nearly so beautiful as they were made out to be.
Yeah, they've certainly made them different looking now,
Right.
at least what we've seen. Those are really good looking mermaids I see over there, those sea cows. So anyway, so let's get back to manatees for people can be educated. So you get involved and you guys are doing this thing, and a lot of it was mainly conservation and stuff like that, or I mean, walk me through some of that.
Yeah, so I started really at full time in 1976, and so at that point in time, like I said, there were less than 1,000 manatees. There wasn't. We did public awareness campaigns, posters, and other types of things that would be help just get the word across. In fact, we worked with a Yale University professor to do a public opinion survey. More people thought a manatee was an insect than they did as a marine mammal.
Wow.
So the next step was really to understand how many manatees were there and to get aerial surveys going. And so there was some basic work being done by the United States Geological Survey, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at that time, and then also Florida Power and Light became a very significant issue as how the power plants were affecting manatees and the warm water they produced to cool the steam.
Right.
And so I actually flew surveys of about 12 different power plants and flew around those areas and counting and looking at the condition of manatees. And bear in mind, at that point, there were no speed zone protections. Essentially, manatees were just open game for fast moving boats and so forth. So this was the time we used this scientifically gathered research and promoted protections within the legislature. We did have the Marine Mammal Protection Act that was passed in 1972, Endangered Species Act in 1973, but that really hadn't been implemented in terms of proactive protections. We worked hard to get a law passed in Florida called the Manatee Sanctuary Act in 1978. So now we fast forward with the work in this sort of infancy still, and in identifying a lot of areas that needed to be addressed, but there wasn't a mechanism or the funding to do it. And that's where in 1981, when Save the Manatee Committee was formed by Governor Graham and Jimmy Buffett as the chair of that committee, that Jimmy went right away and started holding concerts to raise money to actually get those first protection areas that we got through the legislature in place, but there wasn't even money to put the signs up. So a lot of the first money that Jimmy raised went straight into putting these caution signs and warning signs out on the waterway to help keep slow boaters down.
Wow.
And of course, the boaters weren't doing it on purpose. It's just very difficult to see manatees. And so that plus the public awareness were the two main early emphasis of the Save the Manatee Committee.
Wow, that's pretty cool. It's nice when you've got a powerful voice like Jimmy does. The one thing, of course, he just passed away recently, and everybody, I mean, Pirate Looks at 40 is maybe one of my favorite songs, but I've never heard anybody didn't say great things about him. That's, really cool that he was involved and did that. And, how blessed the animal world has, and we do too, to have that. And of course, you got to be involved, become friends with him. So now we've got signs up that are doing that. One of the things that I read, and again, I read it online, so you never know what's right or wrong, is that one of the main ways, the main way that manatees are recognized are really by their scars, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, they're if you were to look, there's about 90, probably 95% of manatees that are alive today of any age that already have multiple scars from being hit by watercraft. Uh, Most of those were not lethal, but the leading cause of death for manatees still remains watercraft collisions.
Oh.
Uh,
So,
we have also a program working at Blue Spring State Park, for example. We have one of our staff members, Wayne Hartley, who's been doing this for over 40 years, identifying essentially every manatee that comes into that clear water spring and knows, who they are by sight. And most of those are named. They're part of our adoption program. But there's also the SCARP were used in a broader sense by the different agency and partners to identify manatees, and through literally now through photographs and with some computer aiding more and more today, it's advancing some, but essentially that again was what really, I guess pun intended, struck me as to how we really needed to provide help for these really defenseless animals. I don't know that I know another species that I can truly just say I don't think they're capable of being aggressive, and in fact they need our help to be able to make it in a world that they, evolved in, not having to worry about large predators, being able to eat seagrass as a vegetarian species. In essence, really, it's been man that's been their problem, and hopefully, the combination of these efforts will be their salvation.
well, and they're not tagged, so they're basically based on what they look like, right?
Well, most manatees are not tagged, and we can still identify them by the marks on them and so forth. Most of them are artificially, acquired.
Hmm.
We do have over the years, through studying and fitting manatees with radio and now satellite transmitters and following them, we can, of course, identify them that way. But that's a very small percentage of the overall manatees.
Well, the thing that I found interesting, again, I read it, and you're the expert. So it seems to me, based on all the research I did, we know a lot about them, but we don't know a ton. Like one of the things I read, we kind of understand the birthing process with them, what they go through, but the way it was written was we think it's this more than they've been not studied. Am I wrong or right on that?
I think today we know quite a lot
Okay.
about them. Yeah, I think we really do know an awfully lot about them. I don't know that that would be something so there have been several birds in captivity, although it might sound counterintuitive. We have actually worked for decades not to have manatees reproduce in captivity because they're then not prepared to go back to the wild. In fact, you would not, except for some pre-act animals, and I'll explain that briefly, that were in captivity before 1972, you really don't have any manatees being held in facilities that aren't being rehabilitated and tried to be and hopefully would be returned to the wild, except for those that have been judged unreleasable. Therefore, they would likely die if they were to be returned to the wild. And that's been an important point for manatees, and it's something that's important under the Endangered Species Act as well as the Marine Mammal Protection Act, that there is a very big effort though underway to rescue and then give the medical treatment necessary and then prepare them for release. And in that process, we've also even had I think we had one birth occur from a pregnant manatee, but we've had very young calves now, and we've worked with them so much with our partners in the Manatee Rescue and Rehabilitation Partnership that even those very young calves can often be raised up in a way and then introduced to the environment with the satellite tags on them and so forth. And then we can pick them back up if they're not doing well. But most of them now, with what we've learned over the decades, are adapting, and they're really contributing back to the wild population.
Now, how many? I know we call they're called the ones here in the U.S. area is the Western Indian manatee. How many do we know what the population of them is now, roughly?
Yes, they've actually adapted to some computer modeling programs and looking at that, and the range is probably between 8 and 11,000.
Oh,
So that sounds like a lot when we only had less than 1,000 back in the 70s and before. But we also just 2 years ago lost 1,100 manatees in one year, and that was a tragic a tragedy in the making. We've been warning against the problems from too much pollution going into the Indian River Lagoon, and they're having harmful algal blooms that were shading out. This thousands of acres of seagrass were lost, and ultimately over 1,000 manatees died from starvation, something
Wow.
that should just never have been allowed to happen. Thankfully, a lot of hard work's been going on and some cooperation from Mother Nature, and we've had some recovery of that seagrass, and so we're in a better position coming through the end of 2023. And things had actually gotten so bad for 2 years, we had to work with many partners to do some supplemental feeding in that area, something
Wow.
we hoped and would hope still not to ever have to do again.
Well, let's educate some people out there that haven't done the research I just did, because they're the only mammal that's 100%. Well, I know that they eat a little bit of some small fish when they're eating vegetation because they're herbivores, right? And
Yes.
but what I thought was, well, I think it's all interesting, but one of the things they go into freshwater as well as saltwater, and they eat plants in both areas.
Yes, they can be in every habitat. In fact, partly why I call myself an aquatic biologist, because I studied limnology, which is, freshwater, and then you have the estuarine habitat, which is a mixture of salt and that and fresh,
Hmm.
and then you have the marine habitat. Well, manatees can occupy our manatees, West Indian manatees, and in Florida, they're the subspecies is the Florida manatees can occupy all those different salinity ranges, and in fact they are. Herbivores, but if there are macrophytes and other things on the outside of the vegetation that they would consume, and they would get that other protein from that, for example. And if they happened upon a fish that was actually literally right there and it was mixed in with that, well, they would eat it, but they're not selecting for that.
So let's talk about how big they are, because they got to eat a lot. I'm curious how much they eat, but I mean, let everybody out there, for listeners, know, from a baby up into a mature adult, how big they actually are, and let's do some specifics on them.
Well, so the average manatee would maybe be 10 feet long and weigh about 1,100 pounds. But we've had manatees get closer to 12 feet and over 3,500 pounds. It turns out that the females are really those that were on an average basis. They're going to be larger than the males. Uh, the female manatees have let's go through their reproductive cycle. In essence, they, like humans, have their own they're on their own ovulation cycle, and will, even though there are more that may get pregnant in the spring, it's not like a herd animal that has most all of their pregnancies and their births at one time. They're spread out over the year, and each individual female is kind of on her own cycle. The males will she will, in essence, be followed by lots of males, up to a dozen or more, over a several week period. Ultimately, then will become receptive to mating, and then those males don't stay. They do not bond in that sense, and so the female raises the calf on her own. Would have a calf approximately every 3 to 5 years. And then that calf would stay with the mother for a year to up to 2 years while it learns many of the lessons it needs to learn. And particularly important one is where would they spend their winters, and they're going to be in warm enough water. And that's because the manatee's metabolic processes are they're much reduced, say, compared to cetaceans or whales, and so they have incomplete blubber layers. So they really are a subtropical or a tropical to subtropical species that needs to have water at least 68 degrees in order to metabolize properly.
Yeah, I read that, and and you'd mentioned earlier one of the things you were looking at was where all the power plants were, because the water's warmer, and they gathered around there. But what I read was, as these power plants are I guess phasing themselves out, now the concern is having warm enough water for them in other areas.
Yes, and that's really critical in several ways. So let me start though with what we have is what produce the more of the natural warm water, which are their springs in Florida.
Okay.
They're in risk of being overpumped. They're in risk of being over polluted and so forth. So we have to protect those going forward. The reason we're going to lose all of, essentially, if we do the climate change work that we need to do and eliminate the so much fossil fuel and the carbon production and that, we're going to have alternative sources of power production that aren't dependent upon burning fossil fuels. And the reason there's warm water from the power plants in the first place is because whatever fuel they use, they're essentially boiling water into steam, and the steam drives the turbines. And then when that has to be cooled back down, and so that it can be recycled through the system. And so the ambient water from an area is drawn in through, piping and so forth. It doesn't mix with the water that produces the steam, but there's a heat exchange, and that's increases what's called the delta T, or the temperature of the water, and that's the warmer water. Well, the dilemma is 60% of our manatees in Florida are dependent on that warm water from those artificial sources in the winter. And we have to find ways to wean them off of that and still protect them in the winter going forward. It's something I've been working on for a couple of decades, and different groups have come together and we've made advancements. And then not the right effort is undertaken with it. And so we're behind the curve on that, and we need to do a much better job. More resources need to be put into that, even some land acquisition and other things. But and, and I'll just say, so much of what's happening in Florida, we are not growing in Florida as sustainably. So much of our development that occurs, we are sort of mortgaging our environmental future. And that's why we have the harmful algal blooms. That's why we are losing the seagrass. That's why we're behind on making the transition away from one source of power production and need to go to others. So all of those things are going to have to be accomplished in the long run if we're going to keep Florida's aquatic ecosystems in balance.
Well, one of the things I've learned since I've been doing this podcast, so it is an awareness thing. And every time you hear something going on with an endangered species or whatever, everything generally comes back from it's not the animal problem or the mammal problem, it's the human problem. We're the ones that are causing we're creating issues for all these beings.
Absolutely, and that's where you even start hearing people point fingers. So when manatees started dying of starvation, we had even one county commissioner in the Brevard County area say, well, seagrass is important. Since manatees are eating it all up, we better start killing the manatees in order to protect the seagrass. Well,
Oh my
the
God.
science is 100% clear. The seagrass loss was from too much pollution, from the septic tanks leaking, from improperly treated wastewater, from the sewage systems, and from runoff from fertilizer and those things. So it didn't last long, and we responded with the science. And I don't know that he's even a commissioner anymore, but that's how some of the folks you're having to deal with. The very people that were a part of the problem want to pass that problem on to the manatee itself, which was of course, the victim, but not only the manatees, but the fisheries.
Right.
And so all the people that love to fish and go out and want to, catch fish and so forth, they're going to be impacted. Tourism, because of the stinking amount of, dead fish and other ill will. So it is really incumbent upon the leadership in Florida. And thankfully, our current governor, DeSantis, at least understands that. He's recently earmarked $100 million towards the cleanup efforts and improving the water quality. Unfortunately, we're going to need about $5 to $6 billion to undo the damages that have occurred. And so it's a good beginning, and we're very grateful, but much more needs to happen.
Well, and I agree with you 100% on that. And I just want to reiterate the fact too, when we talk about the manatees, we're talking about this mammal that's 10 feet long. If you see them, I mean, their nickname is sea cow for a variety of reasons, but they're big, but they're not fat. There's no real. You said blubber earlier, but there's not a lot of fat there, which is the reason why they need warmer water, because they don't have anything to insulate themselves.
Right. They do have layers of fat, but it's not complete. It's not like the blubber from a whale. Yes, exactly right on that. And so they really, and their metabolic rate is a little slower. So they produce less internal body heat as well. And in fact, when it gets too cold, they even quit eating because they're not able to digest the food. So it can really crash fast for them. And we've had some years when it got extremely cold, and There was there's disruptions to them. We lost hundreds of manatees just from the cold related mortality. That would skyrocket to the thousands if we don't aren't successful in finding ways to wean them off of the artificial warm water and protect our natural springs so there are plenty places for them. We do believe we can do it, but we have to have the political backing and the resources to make that happen.
Well, yeah, and when you think about that, when you say thousands and you've got a population of whatever you said, is it 8,000 or 11,000? What is it now?
So 8 to 11 would be a good range.
So if you lost 2,000, you're losing 20% of the population right away just because of that. That's crazy.
Right. And if you lose that many, then you're really up against it in terms of being able to control those things. And that would just unfortunately sort of be the beginning of it. And you'd have this downward cycle. You'd be passing these tipping points that you may not ever be able to recover from.
Well, it's funny because I talked to a lot of groups that are endangered or critically endangered, orangutans and chimpanzees, and that. And the gestation period for the manatees is roughly a year, and they generally only have one calf. They're not. I mean, I guess rarely they have twins, but they in a lifespan. And what I read, so you can always correct me, but is they live on an average around 40 years, but they have like maybe 2 or 3 calves total in a lifespan, or is that wrong?
Well, all the immediate things you talked about are pretty accurate. It is a 12-month gestation cycle. There have normally one calf, not more than one. But if they're allowed to live, and I'll put it that way,
Okay.
if they're allowed to live, a manatee could live over 60 years.
Okay.
Unfortunately, many of those reproductive females are dying by the age of 12 or 13.
Oh, wow.
So it goes to the point you're making. They're only having a few calves. We do have our records with the extensive work that we've done at Blue Spring, for example, and know each of those females. We know when they gave birth and so forth. So some of them are having 4 or 5 or 6 calves, but that's more the exception than the rule.
Well, one of the points I was trying to make out of that too, which I'm not really good at making my points usually, is if you lose 2,000 and of those, assuming 50-50, and I don't know what the percentage of the females to males are, you lose 1,000 of potential mothers to get for them to mature out to be able to reintegrate the population. It makes it a lot more difficult when you lose one. It's not like you're losing one, you're losing all the offspring as well.
Yeah, so you're losing all that reproductive potential, and in fact, we saw other evidence of that exact point when we were losing so many manatees in that area. There were very few new manatees, born and added to it. We're seeing just a little bit of improvement on that. We work with again various partners, and they're doing health assessments, and at least those in that area that was so tragically impacted, we're seeing better health, body condition, and so forth. So we'll see him seeing a few more calves being born, but it would take decades and decades. And I think that's your point. Even if things go really well from here on, it would take decades to make up for what we lost during that time. And if it doesn't go well, it's maybe the beginning of a pattern of decline that, because so much of this is, again, related to excess nutrients making their way into the systems. It's like your garden. Yeah, a little bit of fertilizer can be a good thing and it can help the plants grow, but too much and certain other species like the different planktonic algal species, well, they just love it and thrive on it. It gets so thick it literally shades out the light and kills everything else. It'd be like taking black plastic and putting it over your plants and thinking they're gonna make it through. They're not.
Yeah, I mean, it's well, I mean, the what we do to ourselves as humans all the time affects everybody else. It just drives me crazy. One of the things I've read, what because living in Texas, and I was surprised that because when you see pictures of manatees or you see videos or whatever, they're these slow moving big creatures, but they migrate and they've been seen as far as Texas, where I am, and they've gone all the way up to Massachusetts. I know mainly when they migrate, it's mainly Georgia, Alabama, and kind of South Carolina, but they've gone as far as the other places, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, and that's the exception. And
Yeah.
in fact, we have a manatee which is named Chessie because he was one of the first ones to make it all the way to Chesapeake Bay. Sadly, and he actually has done pretty well. The last time he had some pretty extensive injuries. Don't know where he is now. I certainly hope he's still alive. But he had made actually several trips back and forth. We had an unfortunate manatee that was named Dennis for Dennis, Massachusetts. Unfortunately, that ended up going up and didn't make it back. And so but yes, they can travel long distance. We've had some that were moved in hurricanes and across from Florida, say to the Bahamas. But again, more rare.
Mhm.
But they're big, powerful animals, not aggressive, very, very dependent upon, an ecosystem being kept in reasonable balance. But they're also, can swim up to say 20 miles an hour in a very short spurt.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you. How fast can they swim?
Yeah, so they would normally swim maybe 2, 3 miles an hour, but when they're alarmed and stressed and what have you, they can get up close to that 20-mile range, but only really for a few seconds.
So there's several things I want to talk about. One is their closest relative, or one of their closest relatives, which blew my mind, but it makes sense, is the elephant.
Yes, and so again, that's the closest land
Right.
animal relative. They're just for the sort of factual record. So you're right on that. I just want to remind people there are the dugong is part of the order Sirenia that manatees belong to. So that would be a closer relative, but that's a a species that's in the water, and that would look very similar to a manatee's head and flippers, but its tail is forked like a dolphin. So, but the closest living land animal really is the elephant. And if you look for similarities, if you look at the nails on the manatee's flipper and the nails on an elephant's hoof, you can see there's really kind of similar things like that. The way the manatee uses its two upper lips prehensily, can literally grab things and pull it into its mouth, similar to the elephant's trunk, for example. Where they might diverge is manatees have essentially little pinnae internal ears, and the elephants have those huge,
Right. Yeah.
outside. So, but the thick skin and that type of thing is also similar.
So what is the thing I think it was on your guys' website where they were talking about the manatees and they put it in quotation marks is walking? Do they use their fins to kind of crawl around on the bottom of the what is that?
They do that sometimes when they just want to sort of inch along a little bit. They also can use them, and we did evidence it in years prior, but also during the loss of so much seagrass, they can actually sort of paw their way, in essence, up onto the shoreline, and sometimes will even eat the grass off of people's lawns.
Really?
That's not real common, but it does happen.
Like the walking catfish?
Yeah, but they don't get clear out of the water because
Yeah.
they and you don't if the manatee is out of the water and you see it call we have a alert number that's really it's 888-404-3922. Do call, because if a manatee is completely out of the water, that's a major problem.
Well, yeah, and I want to get into some of the things you're not supposed to do with manatees here in a second. There's a couple other things I want to talk about. One is I want to talk about, and you and I can relate to this, and I think you know what I mean, is that they see color, but mainly they see blues and greens, but they don't see red.
Yeah, that's pretty well accepted. I personally want to even see from the biology of it, that would be the case. I personally want to do a little more. In fact, we have it's a little off target, but we have some cameras that we're wanting to test the infrared type thing. We want to make sure that's not going to do any harm, and so we actually haven't implemented some of that for viewing at nighttime and so forth. And I'm 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 not ready to say what they do or don't do there, but it's also something I'm hoping to have more time to learn more about.
Well, the reason why it stuck out to me, both you and I are pilots, and when you get your first pilot license, you can't get a license. They may have a waiver now if you're colorblind, because if you lose your communication, they use lights. They use a green light and a red light. But if you're colorblind and don't see red, you're not supposed to be able to get a pilot's license.
Yeah, and I don't know today since I got my license back in the '70s. I don't know what
Yeah.
they do now, but
Yeah, there's probably a waiver because I got mine in the '80s, so we're right on the same page on that one.
interesting enough, I have my youngest son is red green colorblind, and so it's been an
My brother is.
interesting to see how he's adapted to different things. He works in IT and so forth, and so he's found good ways around it. Even though sometimes you're right down to the wiring that you're working with is you can't tell one for the other, but you find a way to figure it out.
Well, if you haven't asked him, you ask this. My brother's the same thing, and so
uh,
he told me this in recently being several years ago, but still, he sees a Christmas tree. The Christmas tree's brown to him. I'm wondering, ask your son what the color looks like because he knows what brown is, but he's not. It's brown. He doesn't see a green tree. He sees a brown tree, which is bizarre to me.
yeah, I'd have to see. I just know they've come up with little tricks and different things to try to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you adapt. You don't. If you didn't know, you didn't know. Like, it's kinda like the stoplights. He knew where the red light was because
Yes.
of where it was. I don't I think red's on the top, but he would know exactly where it was because that's just how he knew it.
And of course, that you as I know you're a pilot. I don't know how deeper diving, but it's also interesting. Red is the first light color to essentially disappear as you go deeper underwater. So
I've been diving. I'm not certified, but I've been diving. The deepest I've ever been, I think, is like 50 feet or something like that.
yeah,
So another thing that I read, and I thought this was interesting too, about it's all interesting. I hate saying that term, is that they regenerate their teeth. They lose their teeth and they're continually growing because of them eating everything in sand. I guess sand wears their teeth down or something.
yeah, that's really pretty neat. And this is one of the things that kids love as well to learn about it. We call them marching molars because as they're eating, there's sand or different things in there, and they do grind a lot of plants and so forth. Their teeth do wear down. But as those teeth in the front get worn down, they literally will fall out as new teeth are moving sort of gradually, very, very slowly. New teeth are coming in from the very back of the jaw, and then they're actually moving forward over time so that they could be replaced. Otherwise, a species like the manatee may never have survived,
Right.
and they're in terms of their ability to adapt.
That's crazy. Okay, so let's talk about the laws. I was reading all the things that you're not supposed to do with manatees. If you see one, you're out boating in the Keys or wherever they are, somewhere in Florida, and you see them. I was really surprised about how protected they are, which is a great thing, by the way. It's interesting. Do you want to kind of cover some of that so people understand? I mean, you're not even supposed to feed them.
No, you shouldn't, because it now there was the supplemental feeding program that was permitted and went through all the process because there was an
Right,
emergency,
right.
but we don't want people to go out and to either give them fresh water even or food because it can disrupt their normal behaviors and actually make it more put them in greater danger. So that is something, in fact, I got passed under Florida law when I was heading all the state of Florida's programs for manatees, marine mammals, and protected species, that because we people can lure them in fact, we've even had kind of ridiculous things happen. There was a situation over a little over a decade ago where a couple of teenage fishermen put vegetation on hooks and threw it out and purposely
Uh,
got the manatees to take it in and then hooked them and started playing them like a huge fish. Fortunately, they were caught. Partly because they're kind of their own, I'll just say, stupidity of posting it, and we don't have a lot of that, thankfully, but we do need to have the laws in a place where something like that happens, you can protect them. Uh, the I want to sort of isolate the boating side of it a little bit there.
sure.
You, if you're a boater in Florida and you're trying to boat safely and responsibly and you hit a manatee, there's actually a provision in the law that if you report that, you're not going to be prosecuted for that case. Now, if you have somebody that's speeding through an area, hits a manatee, and tries to claim that, and the circumstances don't hold up to that, then there could still be a prosecution. But for the sort of the average boater out there trying to be a responsible boater, you're gonna it's better that you call it in, and you are going to have some legal protection in that sense from that. So I want to The other area that kind of goes along with the feeding thing, people think they should be able to feed them because they care about them.
Sure.
They think they know what's better there. The same thing, we've had difficulty, especially in Crystal River, where there's the swimming with the manatees. So you really shouldn't be touching manatees. The law does not allow you to disrupt their normal behavior. So we've been kind of having to deal with, we want to promote awareness and we want people to have an affinity for manatees, but we don't want to have that turn into something where it puts them at harm and chases them out of the warm water spring habitat where they really need to be in the wintertime. So there needs to be a balance. And we've worked with different standards and worked with, even tour groups and so forth to try to find that balance between building an affinity for the manatees, but not letting that become a point of abuse.
Right. And I think it's smart. I mean, these poor guys, they're not aggressive. They're vegetarians. And here we are jumping on their backs and trying to swim with them. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean that's completely out of line. And another area, I just mentioned this since we're talking about things. We had one tour operator over there that would take children out, and unfortunately, those are the most impressionable, and you want to be on your best behavior when you're working with children.
Hmm.
But they would actually restrain a small manatee and then let all the kids come around and touch it and
Oh,
hold on to it. And the terrible part of it was when someone saw this happening and wanted to hold them to account and would come up, they would accuse that person of being a pedophile in order to push them, in essence, push them back and
oh.
not be able to document. Thankfully, we've gotten through that and they've been dealt with and so forth. That we don't know that that's happening. I mean, that's kind of how ridiculous it can go in order to just make money off of something.
Yeah, and even if they started with best intentions, they end up having horrible intentions. And again, you're educating kids to do the wrong thing. It's just stupid.
Exactly, and we want the children to care about manatees, but we want to help them learn the right way to do that, and certainly, and that's also why we put so much effort into having sanctuaries for manatees so that they can be observed, say from the boardwalk at Blue Spring or the boardwalk at Three Sisters Spring, places where they can see them, and the water is so clear there, you can see these wonderful, just gentle interactions with the manatees and even other wildlife that are there. And we have our underwater and above water cameras at our manateetv.org, and you can see some just wonderful tender types of things going on there. Those also become research instruments too, so we can look at body condition and the scars and whether an animal's having difficulty and needs to be rescued and so forth. But the general public at large has been very responsible and caring, but those laws are necessary in order to protect them, because if you do drive manatees out of those winter sanctuary areas into the colder water, that can literally kill them, and
Right.
it can also disrupt their normal, even mating and other habitat. So
Well, that's, if there's any advantage of the podcast other than me getting to learn a bunch of stuff and talk to cool people, is that you don't know what you don't know. And if people don't know that they're not supposed to feed them, even if they're not looking at the signs, this is a kind of a good way to do this. But since we're talking about kids, I mentioned earlier, and I told you about this. My son, when he was in, I don't know, his first or second grade, I want to read you this letter. So he wrote all these letters he wrote one to SeaWorld too, and he wrote one to Save the Manatee. And I saved him because obviously I wanted to give it to him when he's older. And so I dug it out before we had it. And so here's his letter. Keep in mind now, he is my son, so there's a reason why I'm telling you this. But he's either in first or second grade. He goes, "Dear Save the Manatee, I love the way you help sea creatures. By the way, my name's Tanner Kyle. I live in Austin, Texas. I'd love to be one of you when I grow up. Here's my phone number and address. Please write me back." Anyways,
no, it's wonderful.
uh, the other funny one is a SeaWorld, so I pulled it out. So he wrote Dear SeaWorld, but C was SEE. So
Uh-huh. I like
anyway,
that.
he's a chip off the old block. That's exactly so. That's about my level of education too. But I was so proud of him, and it really, whoever he had as a teacher obviously was a great teacher to, make him aware of things. But to be able to do that, and I've saved this for all these years. I didn't know that I saved it, and I couldn't have a chance to talk to you. So it kind of worked out pretty cool.
Well, we love that, and we do, of course, work with teachers, and we have special programs for them, and it has been wonderful to see. I will tell you that we had our first director of science and conservation came as a young girl, and wrote letters, adopted a manatee. Ultimately, she got her PhD and worked for us for over a
Oh,
decade
wow.
before she moved on to some other things in her life, but it was wonderful to see that transition. And I've been, I started giving talks and things in the 70s and would go around different places before the world, people even knew as much as they did. We hadn't been as successful in terms of our outreach and so forth. But over those decades, I would have young people come up to me and say, they're in college now. I heard you talk, and so whatever 10 years ago, and I decided I wanted to go into these protection efforts. And so it has made a difference in it, whether they come to work for us or it changes their life in such a way that they truly care not only about manatees but the aquatic ecosystems. That is one of the things that I probably get as much satisfaction from as anything, is to see that we are making a difference in young people's lives. Because I turned 73 this last week, and I'm big part of what I'm about today is trying to be a mentor to others and to help impart what I have seen and gone through and prepare them for the future, because I've failed in many ways. I tried to work myself out of a job all these years, and I'll admit to you right here and now I failed to do that. So I've got to make sure we have the next and the next generation available to carry on.
Well, what you said is it's one of those reminders when you have a young adult or even maybe a more mature adult to come back and tell you what you did, is telling you what you did is you did the right thing, which is really cool. That I mean, you're a mentor to all these people, which is I think is pretty amazing.
Well, we're certainly trying, and we're proud of those that have come through that process and are making a difference. And I hope I get the opportunity to feel like I'm ready to pass that along. A few years back I was thinking I was getting close to retirement. In fact, I was, and probably may have, had we not had that horrible situation develop within the Indian River Lagoon
Yeah.
and lose so many manatees and so many of the things that I had been trying to prevent from happening. Unfortunately, we were warning about them. We had the science. We had conveyed it in about every way possible, but other political forces had come in and been a little more successful in holding it back. So and now I have to look at that and say, we'll use that in an appropriate way to make sure we never get back in a situation like that again.
Well, you always sometimes you got to have a bad thing to teach you a good thing.
Right.
So, unfortunately, I mean, that's how you learn. So, let's do this. Let's tell everybody out there how they can do more research, how to get a hold of you guys, social media, all those things. If you can give all that information out for all the listeners so they can do their own research or reach out to Save the Manatee or whatever, you know it all better than I do, and I'll put it on when the episode comes out. I'll put it in the information in the description. But go ahead, and if you could put that out for everybody, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think the simplest way is to come to Save the Manatee with no S on the S of it, savethemanatee.org. And then you'll be able to learn a lot about manatees there, ways that you can connect. We have a program where we do action alerts as well. You could sign up for that, and we can notify you. You can sign up for our newsletters. Again, all of that can be done through the website. You can call us as well, and hopefully you can put that 800 number up for us, and
Sure.
anyone that's maybe not using their computer or whatever. And on our website too are links to our Facebook page, Twitter, and Instagram, so forth, there as well. And then teachers, we have special programs for you, and our adoptions are much less for teachers. We also have calendars that we do every year that will they make great gifts too, as do the adoptions. So I think that would be what I would urge people most, if they have access to the internet, is to do savethemanatee.org, and of course write us or ask questions. We make every effort to get back with each person that either calls in or writes into email or whatever. We'll get back to you personally.
And I can personally attest to that. For me, trying to, get you guys on, you guys were really receptive, got me together, and now Pat, you're stuck with me. I feel sorry for you, but you're stuck with me. But everybody, Save the Manatees there. You can find it on social media. It's really easy too. I'm following all of them myself. Now, I don't know if I told you yet, or if I told you yet or not, Pat. About I always do. Kind of a dad's joke at the end of the show. Did I ask you to do one? If I didn't, I've got one for you. I've actually got a manatee joke for you.
Well, I'm a punster. I don't think I was prepared to do one, but usually I like to just wing them. So
if you've got one, you can.
Yeah.
I'm all in favor. Because trust me, everybody cringes every time I sing a joke. Says, "Oh God, here he goes again."
Well, I'll do a self-serving one that's not
okay.
Maybe not a groaner. And so when you adopt a manatee with Save the Manatee Club, you get a real living manatee. It's history, biography, and all that. But there is a catch. You don't get to take it home.
That's a good one. Perfect. Now I have one for you anyways, because I kind of like this one. So, and you've probably heard it because obviously you've been around forever. So my dad's show, and by the way, the history of this is, I'll tell you when we get done so I don't waste everybody's time. So here's my joke. Why are manatees great detectives?
Not sure.
Because they're always underwater.
Right.
That's it. That's how bad it is. So
okay.
Now you get what I'm saying.
Well, you might do like I do sometimes. I tell them for the groan rather than the laugh.
Well, trust me, there's a lot of groaning going out there. I understand it totally. Well, anyways, first of all, let me thank you so much, Pat, for doing this thing. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. I know my son's going to really appreciate it. It's funny. I told a few people I was doing it. Everybody can't wait to hear the episode because everybody's so interested in him. So you're doing a good thing because people are already knowing something about it. Now they're going to know a lot more.
Well, we appreciate that opportunity. And I guess I'll be self-serving again, and I'll do the 800 number. It's just 800-432-5646. So you can contact us if you're not access to the computers and whatnot. But we'd love to have you join with us. I mean, the grassroots side of it is what really makes it important. We didn't get all of those other protection zones and things in place in years past because people said, "Oh yes, we agree, we should do it." It took hundreds of thousands of people getting involved and engaged in writing and supporting the efforts to protect manatees. Sometimes 6,000 and 7,000 people turning out at a public hearing and so forth. Thankfully, we've been able to hold on to most of those. We're putting pressure and science behind doing more, and we could sure use that many more people that want to become an active supporter. We have volunteer programs too that you can join in. I would mention too, we had a race in Michigan, the Manatee 5K, that's been going now for decades, and it was in Michigan and would get 1,100 people. So today I've been talking and it's kind of been about me, but we couldn't be here without so many other people, and especially those individuals that have responded and adopted manatees and helped us become the voice for manatees, whether it's in the United States or in other countries where manatees are having a really tough time as well. And I thank you, Mark, so much, and give a shout out to Tanner for me because that may be what got you connected, you and I talking today.
Oh, I'm sure it did. And for everybody listening, obviously now at this point, the episode will be out if you're hearing this thing. So just go to the description. I'll have all the numbers and all that in the description. You'll be able to find it. And most importantly, if you do have an idea for content for the podcast, or you've got a better joke, obviously I can always use one, send me an email. I'll get back to you. It's mkyle@thefurrealpodcast.com. And everybody that's listening, I really do appreciate you. Please spread the word so we can get these kind of messages out to everybody. Follow us, get some more listeners. And again, thank you for real. We're supported by Let's Walk, that's here to love your animals like our own.
Austin, Houston, and Denver. Let's Walk is here to love your animals like our own. From daily walks, play, in-house sleepovers, and more. Go to work, out on the town, or take a vacation knowing your pets are in the best hands. This woman-owned small business does it all. Check us out on Instagram at Let's Walk Austin, Houston, and Denver.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.